The final dash, Donald Trump tours the key battlegrounds as Americans prepare to give their verdict on his presidency in the midterm elections. Hello there, good evening. The United States is in the final hours of campaigning in the crucial midterm elections, seen by many as a referendum on Donald Trump's two often controversial years in office. Mr. Trump has managed to energise both sides of politics, and a large turnout is expected. So will a blue wave sweep the country, or will it be stopped by a red wall? Well, our US correspondent Amanda Walker is in Washington. He says exciting times are ahead. What are the predictions then?
Well, it feels a little like 2016 in the general election at the moment, because the polls are suggesting that the Democrats have the edge here, certainly by a pretty decent margin at the moment. And we see Donald Trump campaigning very hard. He's sort of doing it with the level of frequency and intensity that he was just before the 2016 election. Of course, he was victorious then. He's hoping for victory this time round. He knows this is a big test for him in terms of his popularity. It's the first official judgment, if you like, on his presidency, which is why we see him out there talking about immigration, talking about the things that really fire up his base. He's been talking about the energy on the right, I think, to counter the fact that there's a sort of consensus, really, that it's the left that have that motivation, particularly among female voters who for the past 2 years have felt pretty incensed by Donald Trump's presidency. But in typical Trump fashion, before we've even got any results, he's kind of claiming victory for making this certainly truly one of the most talked about midterm elections in many years.
You know, the midterm elections used to be like boring, didn't they? Do you even remember what they were? People say midterms, they say, what is that? What is it, right? Now it's like the hottest thing. These guys are making a fortune because of me and you. I mean, who ever even heard of midterm? They don't even know what it is. I've had a lot of people say, I don't know what midterm is, but now I'm watching every single minute and I'm going out to vote.
So there is this, certainly in the polls, consensus that the likelihood is that the Democrats will take the House of Representatives, with the more likely polls suggesting that the Republicans will maintain control in the Senate. But of course, there is some reluctance there to really put too much faith in the polls when we know what happened in 2016 when basically they didn't prove true at all. So Donald Trump is hoping that that can be the case again. And if there is a victory for the Democrats in terms of taking at least one of the chambers of Congress, then it will be seen as a kind of triumph for this resistance movement. It's a big test for Trump, but it's also a big test for those activists, for those people who've been inspired, largely women, to get involved in politics for the first time. And that could be written off if they don't prove and yield results in the midterm elections. But also for Donald Trump himself, he knows that 2020 is the big game. And really, if he loses a chamber, historically, that hasn't stopped presidents winning a second round of the presidency.
Interesting, isn't it? Amanda, thanks very much indeed, live there in Washington. Well, the elections tomorrow are to America's lower and upper house, their equivalent of our House of Commons and House of Lords. The Republicans currently have a majority in the Senate. But for the Democrats, the race for the 51 seats needed for a majority there will be a difficult one. That's because of 35 seats out of 100 being contested, the Democrats are defending 26, including 2 independents who usually vote with them. The Republicans are defending just 9. In the House of Representatives, all 435 seats are up for election. 218 is the magic number that makes the majority. That means the Democrats need to win at least 23 from the Republicans to take control. They've only made that many gains twice in the past 50 years. Well, many of the close races that could decide the House are in California, where there's talk of a blue wave against President Trump. Our US correspondent Greg Milam reports now from DeCanso.
If a blue wave is about to sweep America, then this is where it has to break. In California, where a handful of seats could signal Democrats taking back the House of Representatives.
And would you sign in for me, please, sir, right here?
Even in traditionally Republican districts like this one, suddenly a Democrat candidate stands a chance.
Is it going to be a referendum vote on Trump or not? This is the time to make a stand on, do you want this wave to continue or you want to switch directions?
Women's rights, minority rights, disabled rights, all of the vulnerable populations, immigrant rights, they're being trampled upon, called names. and we've got to bring it back to American values.
I think Trump's doing a great job. He's doing everything he said he was going to do, and that's why I voted for him. I didn't vote for him because he's a likable guy, and I voted for him because of what he said he was going to do, and that's what he's doing.
If you guys give me a chance, you give me 2 years to put country over party, I promise you won't be disappointed.
But it's those Republicans not so happy with Trump who might turn to a 29-year-old Mexican Palestinian American.
It's not enough to just oppose Trump or be angry about what half of America voted for on Election Day in November of 2016. We have to try to work together. And then America's never been at the mercy of just one person or president, that we have to all work together to get the government that we want. And Trump is just one person.
Head north and you reach Orange County. The OC, Ronald Reagan said, was heaven for Republicans. But it's now majority-minority.
When you first signed up, to vote and stuff like that, you had to wait in the big line, right?
That changing demographic and a drive to get out the young vote.
Maybe it's time to get all of those older people out and get some young blood who are more closely aligned to what we are today to make decisions based on what today's climate is and not the 1950s.
For the longest time, even before I was 18, I just didn't care about politics. My voice didn't matter. I'm just one in, 7 billion people in the world. Why do I matter? My voice. And then I started becoming more interested and I'm more aware in politics. And I was like, you know what? I think if we all banded together, it would make a big difference.
Surfing in the Washington swamp isn't easy.
But there are those like the Republican who's represented this area for 30 years, the man known as Putin's favorite congressman, who say this blue wave will never materialize. And for all the campaign noise, if Democrats can't deliver a knockout blow to Trump now, what chance do they have in 2020?
I think Dems can find a way to beat Trump. He's intensely unpopular. The only problem is that they don't have a candidate. That's really the challenge for Democrats is for a unifying candidate to emerge who can really bring liberals, moderates, and even conservatives to convince them that there's a legitimate alternative to Trump out there.
It's clear what they make of Trump in a state he lost by 4 million votes. But he did still win that election. And who'd predict with any certainty now whether the tide really is turning against him? Greg Milam, Sky News, California.
Well, American voters are set to elect new members of Congress, and in the process, they'll deliver the biggest verdict on Donald Trump's presidency since he was elected 2 years ago. They're known as the MidTerm elections, and they will decide who controls the two chambers of the US Congress, which pass laws to enact the president's policies and indeed can also block his senior appointments. Now, 35 out of 100 seats in the Senate are being contested this year, but all of the 435 seats in the House of Representatives are up for election this time. And Donald Trump's Republicans currently have a majority in each chamber, but the Democrats hope that they can win the seats needed to take control in at least one of them. More than 30 million people have already cast their votes in these midterms. As our North America editor John Sopel reports, the result will have significant consequences for US policy in the next 2 years.
His name is not on the ballot anywhere across the United States, but the forthcoming elections are all about Donald Trump. He's put himself at the absolute centre of this campaign, hurtling around the country energetically. And so it's impossible to avoid the conclusion that the results of tomorrow's midterm elections will be a referendum on his presidency. Today, he was in Ohio.
Everything we have created and achieved is at stake on Election Day. It is. If the radical Democrats take power, they will take a wrecking ball to our economy and to our future.
The issue that's grabbed more attention than any other is this: the caravan of immigrants making their way up from Central America and heading towards the US border. The president has deployed thousands of troops and fearsome rhetoric. America is about to be invaded, he says. Fear-mongering, say his opponents. Getting fewer headlines is healthcare, but arguably of far greater concern to many more Americans. The administration stands accused of watering down people's ability to get insurance cover if they have pre-existing conditions.
Make sure we turn out that vote.
The Democrats in this climate are struggling to find their voice, and so they're relying on someone who seems to have lost his.
You vote, you might save a life. That's pretty rare where that happens.
Barack Obama was today campaigning in Virginia and has been the one Democrat still able to draw a crowd and enthuse supporters.
Health care for millions is on the ballot. A fair shake for working families is on the ballot. And most importantly, the character of our nation is on the ballot.
The numbers turning up at rallies, the numbers turning out to vote early are extraordinary. These are midterm elections like no other.
Let's go live to the White House, and John is there. Like no other, you said, John. Just underline for us, what is at stake in these elections?
A huge amount. Just take the language that Donald Trump has used over the caravan. Lots of Republicans on his own side have said this is a misjudgment, we should be talking about the economy, and you're almost being racist in some of the things you're saying. Just imagine that after tomorrow, Donald Trump, the Republicans keep control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. He will feel total vindication. And if he wants to shut down the Mueller investigation into Russia, if he wants to pull America out of NATO, if he wants to build that wall on the southern border, who is going to be the Republican that dares stand up to him and says, you're wrong, you've made a misjudgment here? I think it will be very hard. I think Donald Trump will be able to do exactly what he likes without hindrance. But on the other hand, if the Democrats do well and they take the House of Representatives, which according to opinion polls they might do, then it is a completely different story. They will wrap the White House up in red tape. They'll be demanding documents. They'll be subpoenaing this and that. They'll demand Donald Trump's tax returns. They will demand evidence of why they appointed Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And Donald Trump's pet project will get thwarted all the way. So I think it's not unreasonable to say that actually the future direction of the United States of America is at stake in these midterm elections tomorrow. And as for a prediction on what the outcome will be, we were here 2 years ago and it didn't work out so well.
Good evening. With just hours to go until voters across America start heading to the polls, President Trump is keeping up his relentless pressure in an election seen as a referendum on his leadership. Tonight, like nearly every night for weeks, he has been taking to the stage to talk up the economy and talk down on immigration, as if his presidency depended on it. As while this time the White House isn't on the line, his policies very much are. Lose big tomorrow and he will likely lose his ability to drive through his agenda, something that is firing up both sides who love him and those that hate everything he stands for.
Please welcome the President of the United States.
To a quite remarkable extent, even though his name is not on the ballot, this has become a referendum on one man. Donald Trump has campaigned relentlessly across the country, never moving to the political center, but rather seeking to mobilize his core supporters. Just an hour ago here in Cleveland in Ohio, nearly 2,000 miles from the Mexican border, Trump continued to raise the specter of a migrant invasion.
Democrats are inviting caravan after caravan, isn't that nice, of illegal aliens to flood into our country and overwhelm your communities. That's what's happened. Have you seen the pictures?
This is the state in which his populist message first gained such traction. And now he needs Ohio to deliver once more, this time for Republican congressional candidates.
If the radical Democrats take power, they will take a wrecking ball to our economy and to our future. A vote for Republicans is a vote to continue our extraordinary prosperity, our extraordinary journey together. It's a journey that we made together.
This city evokes powerful memories for Trump. It was here in 2016 that he was crowned the Republican presidential nominee. And even at that point, few imagined that he was on his way to the White House.
2 years on from that theatrical moment, and voters here in the industrial Midwest and across this divided country will now have a first opportunity to pass judgment on a truly tumultuous presidency.
To gauge the mood on the eve of voting, we spoke to Cleveland's sports fans. If Republicans tomorrow exceed expectations, the power of the American economy will be a key factor.
Got a lot of friends and family in the coal mine and steel industry, so to see them be able to go back and put food on their family's table has been awesome for me.
Where there were no jobs before, now there's jobs everywhere.
But even amid the good humor of a tailgate party, the divisions are on display.
I have a lot of friends that's Republicans, and they talk about Democrats like dogs. I just try to ignore it.
I think people really feel like they have to take one side or the other, and there is no middle ground anymore. And in the past, middle ground was okay.
Democrats have struggled to find a coherent message or a strong messenger. So they are now relying on a former president to galvanize their voters.
The character of our country is on the ballot.
Thank you.
Trump is tonight holding his final rallies in Missouri and Indiana. Will this be seen as the high-water mark of his presidency? For by tomorrow night, Democrats may be in a position to paralyze his agenda. Robert Moore, News at 10, Cleveland.
Well, after Ohio, as Robert said, the president is heading here to Indiana tonight, where his supporters are already massing. It is the second of 3 rallies. After that, he heads on to Missouri, keeping up the relentless pace of recent weeks. In the last month alone, he's held more than 20 rallies across the country, including in Kentucky. There, the Democrats are trying to galvanize women into voting in a state where Donald Trump won almost 2/3 of the votes cast 2 years ago. It is that growing support amongst which is being credited for boosting the political prospects for the Democratic Party in and around the city of Lexington. Their candidate there is among a record 256 women running for office tomorrow, hoping to cause an upset and turn the bluegrass state green.
The bluegrass state boasts one of the most peaceful landscapes imaginable, but it's also home to one of the toughest fights in the midterms. Historically deeply Republican, Kentucky's increasingly divided by the nature of the presidency itself.
The things that are considered acceptable now are not okay in any form.
Elizabeth Young never expected to go out campaigning for anyone. The mother of 3 was raised a Republican. Trump's presidency changed that.
The way that this administration has gone, I want to be on the right side of history, so I will knock for every Democrat that I can.
And few women are fighting back harder than the Democrat she's campaigning for. Amy McGrath's a mum too, but for 20 years she flew fighter jets in the US Marines, and it shows.
What you are doing is you're serving your country right here, right now. I would argue you're saving your country.
Just look at the number of women here, women who traditionally don't turn out for the midterms, women who believe their daughters deserve more than Donald Trump.
I think it's what's happening in our country. I don't think it's just the administration. I think it's the fact that we need better leaders in our country, and that's been obvious for a while. So,
what will you bring?
New leadership, a new generation of leaders.
Just 2 years ago, she'd never considered a career in politics. She's now neck and neck with her Republican opponent. Amy McGrath is one of a record number of women candidates running for office this year. They come from all different kinds of backgrounds, but many are motivated to run from what they've seen over the past 2 years. And it's the American suburbs that could deliver Congress back to the Democrats. There are signs the Me Too movement and the Brett Kavanaugh hearing have mobilized women here. Among them, Tyra West, once a young Republican, now a working mum who's decided to come off the sidelines.
I put a sign in my front lawn. I've never been that kind of person. But I think the political climate has made it such that I just can't be quiet.
It's a hunger for change that isn't limited to women, nor shared by all of them. At the local Republican headquarters, they're campaigning hard, not to spite, but because of their president.
Women's pay scales, women's job rates are all up. Look at all the women he has on the staff. So those actions, to me, speak very loud.
So what I see in him is a strong man. As far as the missteps that he's had, I feel like that's just part of his process into becoming the best version of himself. And I feel like he's really on that path right now.
But at this Lexington coffee shop, there's a shared sense among the women who meet here to crochet that the country they love is unravelling.
It's very disheartening to know that we would elect such a horrible person to represent our country. Like I said, I feel like we are, as Americans, so much better than what he puts out there. And it just breaks my heart that we're in the situation that we are.
The midterm race is all but over. It may now come down to women who haven't always used their vote, deciding to stand up and be counted. Rachel Younger, News at 10, Lexington, Kentucky.
Back to Robert Moore in Cleveland, Ohio. Robert, difficult question, but what do you think on the eve of the vote are the expectations for its outcome?
Well, look, the conventional wisdom undoubtedly is that Democrats will win control of the House of Representatives and that Republicans will retain control of the Senate. That would be, if it happens, a recipe for gridlock, because it means that House Democrats would gain control of all the key committees and they would launch almost immediately a tsunami of investigations, of course, into the Trump White House, into the finances, the ethics of the Trump administration, but also, of course, in addition, into the Trump family business. But look, let's point out that almost everybody got 2016 wrong. You know, the pollsters were not just humbled, they were humiliated. Very few people anticipated Trump's victory then, and it is possible we're getting it wrong again this time, because are we still underestimating Trump's silent voter? Or perhaps this time, are we underestimating the energy and the anger of young Democrats? I think there's another point too about these midterm elections, which is that really tomorrow may settle an argument that has been raging for 2 years, which is whether Trump's election in 2016 was something of an anomaly, a sort of what historians might call a black swan event, something that was unforeseen and unforeseeable, the kind of political shock of a lifetime. Or rather, was it something that told us something important about the values and trajectory of this country? And I think tomorrow's election outcome may help us solve that long-running argument.